Hey, good. How are you?
Good. How's it going?
Doing well.
So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Very excited about this season of the show. From what I was able to see, it seems like there's going to be a lot of changes, a lot of ups and downs throughout this season. I was curious, like throughout it, would you say was like your favorite moment throughout the season?
It's hard to say because there are a lot of really interesting things. I think the thing that I was the most excited about and that I think is really cool this season was just being able to go behind the Iron Curtain with Margot and see how the Soviet Union had changed in our alternate reality and sort of what her experience there was and her story and where she ends up by the end of the season. I thought was really fun and unexpected and fascinating. I think that's for me, that was very satisfying.
Was there any part of this experience that you feel like changed you or impacted you in a positive or negative way as an artist?
I think each project changes you. In my experience, each one you give yourself to and you discover things and you have defeats and you have victories and they all come and form the next piece that I'm going to work on. So as an artist, I think you're constantly in this dialogue with your creation, whatever it is. And this one is no different than all the way back to Star Trek. Every script is a new challenge. It's another blank page, and they're all informed by the pages you've written before that. And I think this season, moved me and surprised me in ways because I thought we were, at the beginning of the season, you plan out what you think the year is going to be, and you generally hew to what that is. But there's always these sort of unexpected changes and unexpected character things that pop up along the way. And that's gratifying that, you still have this sort of discovery process in the middle of a show in its fourth season.
That opening was something like, and it still gives me chills, like the opening of like obviously the 80s, 90s, and then 2000s.
Yes.
What is it like to play with history, like you mentioned, like our alternate reality? What is it like to play with like, gore? Like I just think it's just incredible. Like what's that like? Because it's like just a playground to do whatever you want.
I think it's a lot of fun. It's a tremendous amount of work, because a lot of time is spent in the writer's room. Okay, this is the era that we're going into. What really happened and what could have happened in our reality? What's happened since the last time the characters have been here? And we always have like dozens and dozens of possibilities of what we're going to play with. Everything from pop cultural moments to, geopolitical things to, science and technology. And there's a lot of pitches. There's a lot of ways to go. And you have to sort of steer this course of, well, we will have to have some grounding in what really happened so that the audience sort of has these touchstones of, okay, I kind of remember that in the 2000s. I kind of remember this happened in the 90s and so on. But the further that we get down our path, the more we're diverging from what people really remember. So it is a challenge to pick out those little points of historical truth and keep them in the show. But as someone who loves history and politics, I find it a lot of fun. I just think there's really a lot of fun in playing the game of what if this happened, how would it affect this thing over here? I think it's just one of the favorite parts of being in the writer's room of the show.
We were dealing with a real life historical situation, probably less so in recent years, but Hollywood has always been criticized for a lack of strong, prominent female lead characters. How did that come into play as you killed off two of your original strong, prominent female leads with Karen and Molly, season 3?
Well, part of the show is generational. That's how we pitched it. And when you're doing a generational show, you knew that you were going to constantly be like losing cast members. And in some ways, it's sort of a tribute to the fact that they were strong leads. It's like the leads are the ones that you have the biggest stories for, and it hits the audience the hardest when you take those characters out. So, we're kind of aware of that, but it felt like those were the correct endings to those stories, and then new characters come up behind them.
And that kind of leads into what I was thinking, like, Ed has been this protagonist for a lot of the many POVs that we follow in the series. And that Ed is 70 years old, did not part, wireless much older. We haven't been. Do you see it as like end of Act 1 for like these people, like for mankind, introducing a new generation where it goes to end? Like how
we tried to make it sort of a rolling introduction. I mean, if you go all the way back to the first season, the Stevens kids were established in the pilot as little children. But we always knew that in the course of the show, those kids were going to grow up and be part of the story. So we were always kind of trying to plant characters or suggestions of characters to sort of pay off later as older cast members were either killed or died off or just left the story altogether. So it's always been an ongoing thing. It's never been sort of, well, this is the chapter of Ed, or this is the chapter of Tracy and Gordo. We kind of felt that there was a continuum, and we always wanted the next people to sort of be lining up, someone behind them.
What would you say was the biggest challenge about in last season?
I think from a production sense, it was certainly expanding the Mars base, because it had to be definitely bigger, had to have a lot more people. It's a challenge, we have a budget. It's a healthy budget, but it's never enough. And so you're always running out of money, and you're literally running out of stage space of how big you can build these things. And, then balancing that with digital effects and how much, there's just a tremendous amount of production challenges to realize this show, especially because you've got the Mars base, you've got stories back on Earth, and you've still got space-based vehicles that are flying around and going to asteroids and all that. So juggling all those pieces is a huge challenge. And the further we get down our road, the more science fiction the show becomes. It makes it more expensive, more of a challenge each season on top of it. Where in season 1, we were trying to use a lot of existing stuff. You can go shoot on location to do a lot of things we did in the first season or two. But now, when you're on Mars all the time, we have to create everything that's on Mars. So it's just a huge production challenge.
That's an interesting point, because you mentioned now you're by necessity having to lean more into a science fiction side of the storytelling. Before, reading the synopsis for the upcoming season, and you talk about mining asteroids and types, and how do you avoid comparisons to other shows like, say, The Expanse, for instance, which was primarily focused on that very subject? How do you differentiate what you're doing with this show from things like that, and trying to keep it fresh but still kind of jump?
Right. I mean, there's some common themes that you just look at that a show like ours and theirs are just going to do. The asteroid belt is there. At some point in space exploration, it's going to be mined. There'll be commercial interests involved. There's going to be miners. So there's certain commonalities, and you try not to worry about it too much. When I was on Deep Space Nine, for instance, there was Babylon 5 was going. And there are certain commonalities to having space stations. There are certain commonalities to sort of who those characters were going to be. And you just tried to not think about it too much. You tried to not deliberately say, well, they went left, so we're going to go right just 'cause. You tried to just sort of, in your mind, silo their show off and ignore it, and just try to be true to the story that you're telling here. And if there are commonalities or there are pieces that are somewhat similar, you just hope that, we're telling such a different story with different characters that those common points don't really matter.
You have such a rich background in science fiction, obviously, such experience. Is there still stuff that surprises you? Because you mentioned the hardest part was being on Mars and expanding that set. And obviously, working with consultants from NASA and whatnot to make sure it's realistic. Is there still stuff that surprises you when you're like, oh, we should do this? And no, that wouldn't work that way.
Oh, yeah.
There.
It's constantly, I'm always surprised by just certain basic physics things that I don't get, or that I thought I understood, and then I'm surprised they don't work that way. Garrett will tell you lots of stories, especially in season 1 and 2, when we're sending spacecraft around the moon and doing maneuvers and trying to get them to into season 2, we had the big face-off, right, with the missile and then the Soviet shuttle, and coming around and Garrett painstakingly explaining to me how this can't really happen this way, that, orbital mechanics being what it is, you have to go down when you think you're going up, and it's this whole complicated thing where I just wanted them to go in this direction so that he could see the bad guy, and and it's surprising, oh, it's really complicated, it is rocket science. So very different.
So, looking at Ed, I feel like you guys have probed this man over the course of the premiere, breaking a little bit more for what the happened. Love him with this character for bad. Like I like. Look, I feel like such a man of honor. Like and he just can't catch it. Like if he will jump in the premiere, like he's always second. I bet others and definitely if outside of the dollar he's ignoring it.
Yeah, I mean it's a great character, and we sort of had kind of decided that was going to be his journey from the outset, not in the specifics, but the overall arc that you're talking about. Here's a guy from the classic Right Stuff Apollo era, poster. Here's that guy. Now, in this new reality, what happens to that guy? And let's really send him through the ringer. Let's not make it easy for him, because if it's easy for him, that's a really boring story for that character. What are the challenges he's going to face? What's he going to realize his own problems and his own biases, his own flaws, his struggles with his family and his friends, and his sense of who he is, and himself realizing how much he's defined by his job, and that he's often putting his family in second place as much as he says he's not. His actions kind of take him to this other world, and then making him face that reality and have to sort of look in the mirror to a certain extent. It's a fascinating character, and it's an interesting journey for someone who starts, at that point. It starts in the Right Stuff, and how do you get all the way to where he is now?
And how much collaboration do you have with Joel in his development of the character? Does he take an active part in crafting where his story arc is on that person?
He definitely takes a part in how the character works, right? So there's discussions with Joel about who Ed Baldwin is. What are his reactions to things? And especially the deeper you get into a series, the more that actor really understands the character from the inside out. So his insights, like almost any of the cast, becomes more valuable to the writer because they're now living it in a way that in the first season, everyone's just kind of still discovering and figuring out, well, who is that? And could he be like this? Well, maybe he's like that. Now he is. So he knows who Ed Baldwin is. So you'll have discussions with him about what the character might do in a given set of circumstances. And then we provide the circumstances and then take his input of like, okay, he was talking about this is how Ed's internal world is, and this is kind of Ed sees these things. Okay, now we're going to put him into this situation. Let's use some of that. Let's think about how that would operate here.
You've touched on a few points of the history of your career. You've been involved in some of my all-time favorite shows.
Mine too.
More of a behind-the-scenes question, something I know me as a fan, I would like to know. Who's the unsung hero of your career? Like, who's helped you think the most that doesn't get them up?
Ira Stephen Bear. He was, when I first joined Next Generation, Ira was kind of running the writer's room in third season and kept the writers from mutinying and taught, and I was just a kid, and it was my first, I didn't know anything, and he treated me like a professional and took me under his wing on that staff, and then he left, and then when I went over to Deep Space, he was running that show, and I learned a tremendous amount about show running, about management, and about just pure writing from Ira Bear. And Ira was really the heart and soul of Deep Space Nine, and really guided it and made it, into what I think is the best of all those Star Trek series, back in the day. And I don't know that he gets enough credit really for his contribution to both those Star Trek series, and also just as a writer and a producer in television. He was just an extraordinary person.
I would do it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
So that was great. Pleasure.
Take care.
That was a great ending question. There's no one following that.
See ya.